Well, we've got William and Susan Meggs on the line, and we're going to talk about their book, Recreational Barking. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Great. So this book, Recreational Barking, what's the story behind it?
Well, it's actually an autobiography of an artist, Tom Martin, who had no money, went to New York City, no job, and he successfully broke into the New York City art scene. This is back in the end of the 1960s, going into the 1970s. He was having sellout one-person shows in Manhattan at top galleries, and then he developed chronic progressive multiple sclerosis.
Oh.
And it's an autobiography. He tells the story of his childhood, of his becoming an artist, of his successes, and then how he dealt with multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
And it's richly illustrated with 65 of his paintings.
Wow.
So it's an art book as well as an autobiography.
Yeah.
And it has contributions from famous artists, including Susan, who knew Tom and testify about his work.
Because it's an autobiography, did he write it?
When we did the autobiography, he was paralyzed. He was no longer able to type. He dictated it, and I had the honor of having it dictated to me.
And when you were writing it, did you learn stuff about him that you didn't know previously?
Oh, yes, I learned lots of things.
Tom had a great sense of humor. That was his hallmark, and he loved to tell stories. He had many more stories to tell than what are recorded in the book.
So how long had you known Tom for?
I've known him the longest. I met him in 1965.
Wow.
He and I were both graduate students at Syracuse University. He was getting a Master of Fine Arts in painting, and I was working on a PhD degree in all things theoretical physics. In spite of this big difference, we met, we bonded. He taught a drawing course in the evening. I took his drawing course, and then we would go down to the local pub and hoist a paint together. And I met many, many other people in the Syracuse art scene through Tom. So it's one of the best friendships I ever had.
Yeah. And I met Tom in the fall of 1970, soon after I came to New York. His sister was my assistant at the Museum of the American Indian.
Wow. What was he like as a person back then?
Everybody liked Tom. Tom and his art were outrageously funny. He was very mischievous. He never missed an opportunity to push people's buttons.
One thing I would say about Tom, he was extremely generous. As Susan said, he was a people person. But I always had a place to stay in New York City, and I would visit Tom at least once a year when I wasn't living in New York, and I was just a steady stream of people who came through.
Yeah.
And I also want to mention that Tom was an intellectual, too, liked to present himself as one of the boys in his repartees. That was a better way to elicit responses that allowed him to observe human idiosyncrasies and foibles.
Yeah. In terms of his art as well, how would you describe him as an artist?
Tom was really on the way to success. Tom was very well respected by people who we knew, who were established artists. His humor was also very evident in his art as well as in his storytelling. And he was it was a sympathetic portrayal of human foibles that he really showed, but very much in an American cultural context.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to add that Tom had a deep understanding of art history. So he was really, as I mentioned before, an intellectual. He deliberately borrowed classic elements for his own kind of sophisticated interpretations, but using a comic style. So it was about metaphors in his work.
And of course, as you mentioned earlier, he had this diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. What was his reaction to that?
Well, at first, Tom denied it. He was very much in denial at the first several years. But and he promised me not to tell anybody that he had multiple sclerosis. And then a few years later, his symptoms started to get worse, and we went to a neurologist, and she sat Tom down and said to him, "You have MS and you have to know you have it." But Tom was very determined. He kept working.
Yes. Tom even kept working when he could no longer hold a brush. And I was honored to help him paint. It was his brain and my hands.
Yeah.
We took some drawings of his back when he still had manual dexterity, blew them up, traced them on the canvases, and he would tell me how to mix the paint. Yellow, put a little touch of red, mix it up. Too much red, put a little more yellow. Thin it with some turpentine. I actually got a course in how to do oil painting by being his assistant. As I said, his brain, my hands.
Yeah.
And of course, the paintings were not as elaborate and detailed as his, but a section of his autobiography has reproductions of these paintings he did with assistants.
It was a very clever thing that he worked out of how people would be able to assist him in the studio. It was an example of his determination to fight MS. And I also wanted to mention that before he lost the dexterity, he did a series called Back to Health. And he was showing himself, because everything was really autobiographical in his work as well. But he showed himself exercising, jogging, lifting weights, whatever. Even when actually at that point, he really couldn't do those things anymore. But that's also when he started his computer animations, which was something very new at the time, something very avant-garde. And notably, he did one of a guy on a treadmill, which Tom called a metaphor for life. So he had himself really on a treadmill. And then he did another series of the ventriloquists, which were these art history lessons. He taught a lot of art history at the university. And he typically switching roles again. The ventriloquist was the dummy, and the dummy was the smart guy who answered the question.
That's quite clever. And why do you think he wanted to write an autobiography?
Because he wanted to tell stories.
Yes, Tom was a great storyteller. He was a great humorist. His and Susan's love was a gathering place for large numbers of people, and Tom would entertain. He enjoyed telling the stories as my being the person he dictated them to. And so many of them were just laugh out loud funny. I had to correct a lot of misspellings because trying to keep up with his humor and stay serious enough to type it when I was rolling on the floor laughing was very difficult. I think people reading the book, reading his autobiography, will laugh at some of the most outrageous humor you'll ever read.
How would you like to raise more awareness about multiple sclerosis?
Well, the first thing I would say is the Multiple Sclerosis Society had a traveling exhibit called Project Rembrandt about artists who had multiple sclerosis. The best, most eminent artists, and Tom was in that. He was interviewed on CBS News. He was interviewed talking to Kitty Carlisle and Maury Alter.
Wow.
But the most important thing to me is we do not have a cure for multiple sclerosis. And Tom's story is a story of a tragedy. It's a story of a person gradually over a 20-year period going from a vibrant, energetic person to having difficulty walking. All the medical profession has to offer is supportive care, a cane, a walker, an electric scooter, a nursing home bed. So we desperately need a cure for this horrible disease. There are some treatments for intermittent relapsing multiple sclerosis, but the first FDA treatment for chronic progressive MS wasn't until 2017. And it doesn't cure the disease, it just modestly slows the progression. So we definitely need more research, and the people who have MS need to have very very good supportive care.
Yeah.
Yes. And I would say that the book itself, Recreational Barking, is a vehicle for raising awareness of MS and what it's really like to live with MS.
Absolutely. Well, where can we find the book Recreational Barking?
You can find it everywhere. It's for sale on Amazon.com. It's hardback, paperback, and Kindle.
Barnes and Noble.
It's available on Barnes and Nobles. It can be ordered through bookstores. Hopefully it'll be stocked in bookstores soon, but it was just released last month.
And on Kindle. It's on Kindle as well.
Excellent. Well, many thanks for joining us today. It's been great to talk to you both.
No, thank you. It was great to talk to you, Toby.
You're welcome.